So Rick, thanks so much for joining me. As I was saying off camera, it's a real honor having you on. I think to have an expert in any field on is an honor, but especially when it's an area that I'm so interested in, and it's cult behavior, cult intervention. You've had an extraordinary kind of career documenting this, writing books, lecturing, doing interventions. So we're going to get into all that. But I think they needed to start off, like you must have come across all sorts of cults, from like the bigger ones to the smaller, lesser known ones. Like, what's the most insidious one you've come across, and why?
Well, I would say the two that most people would remember and that are very well known are the Waco Davidians, led by David Koresh, which ended in a terrible, tragic fire in the early 90s. And he was a leader that stockpiled weapons and was preparing for the end of the world. And he also raped children. And there was one girl that was raped at the age of 12, another at the age of 10. He was a horrible person, and often described as a psychopath. And they had a compound outside of Waco, Texas. And that group had been there for many, many years, with different leaders, beginning with one leader, Victor Houteff. But they were always peaceful. They didn't stockpile weapons. They didn't make trouble. They got along with everybody. And then came a man named Vernon Howell, who would later change his name to David Koresh, and he changed everything. He was at first prosecuted for attempted murder. When he was ascending to the leadership position, he tried to murder a rival, a man by the name of George Roden Jr. And he didn't kill him, but he was tried for attempted murder. And when he got acquitted because the jury could not agree, I think there were one or two people that would not vote to convict him. He got away with it. And his takeaway was, I'm going to stockpile weapons. And he had just a huge amount of weapons and ammunition, thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition. And I deprogrammed two people from that Waco Davidian sect, one before the government standoff and raid, and one actually during the raid. This was a young woman who was locked out of the compound through the raid, and then the subsequent security that was created by the FBI to keep people from going in or coming out. And she was visiting her family at the time of the raid, and she desperately wanted to get back in the compound. Her family was terrified that she would. There had been attempts of others to get into the compound during the standoff. So they were very worried about her, and I traveled to Waco, Texas, where I eventually met with her and her family, and that was a successful deprogramming intervention. The other group that people would remember would be the group NXIVM, led by Keith Raniere. Yeah. I was the first cult expert to recognize that group, and the only one really that did interventions. I got about 5 people out of NXIVM through interventions, and many more through my work online through the Cult Education Institute, where I published papers. I was the first person to publish papers that were written by 2 doctors, a clinical psychologist and an MD psychiatrist, examining the training that Keith Raniere had implemented and that he was using to break people down and manipulate them within NXIVM. And there were 2 heirs to the Seagram's liquor fortune, Claire and her sister Sarah Bronfman. And these were the 2 Bronfman sisters that each inherited something like $500 million from their father, Edgar Bronfman Sr. So the end result was they gave Keith Raniere about $100 million. And he sued me for 14 years trying to get me to take information down from the Cult Education Institute website, where people can go, culteducation.com, because these papers written by very respected doctors explained what he was doing and fully exposed him. And so he wanted that taken offline, and I refused to do so. And I was defended by excellent attorneys that wouldn't charge me a penny and defended me for 14 years. And then the lawsuit was dismissed shortly before Raniere was arrested. And as some of the people listening might recall, Keith Raniere was eventually convicted for sex trafficking, fraud, and he was violent. He actually tortured many women by branding them with his initials that were literally branded into their flesh on their pelvis, with a cauterizing iron that was used by a doctor who was brainwashed, in my opinion, and a member of NXIVM. She later lost her license to practice medicine in the state of New York. But there were, I think, 50 women who were branded, and there were 150 women in this kind of cult within a cult, which was called DOS, which was sex slaves under the control of Keith Raniere. And I would later testify at his criminal trial. And I met him on a number of occasions in court-ordered mediation, in court proceedings. And ultimately, I tried to look him in the eye in the court when he was being tried criminally. He is now serving over 100-year sentence in federal prison. And of course, with David Koresh, when I first became aware of him was when I did interventions in New York State, not for the Waco Davidians, but there was another breakaway Davidian sect, and I deprogrammed 2 people successfully from that group, which was led by a Jamaican. They were rivals of the Waco Davidians, which were the main group. And I would learn about the Waco Davidians through my research on that other Davidian sect, and that would eventually make me aware of David Koresh and what he was doing. And I helped many, many families before, during, and after the standoff, dealing with Koresh and his control. Also, I was consulted by the BATF and the FBI before the raid and then subsequent to the raid.
Yeah. They are too, Koresh as well. My from what I've read and I've looked on Koresh, he definitely fits that dark triad kind of personality type, or the Machiavellianism, 100%. He's stockpiling, he's doing everything rather than conceding, and he's trying to find a way to win, even when the FBI are piled up outside. Narcissism, I don't know, I'd love to get your take on this in a moment, but I don't know if these people, a lot of these cult leaders, genuinely believe they're messianic and believe almost what they're telling their followers. But if it is, it's a hyper strain of narcissism, and then definitely the psychopathy. I think is I actually think cult leaders and long game con men and women are actually nearly more psychopathic than some of the serial killers, because they're constantly having to look whoever they're conning in the eye. It's a very intimate thing, where a serial killer, which is archetypically people think that's the archetypical psychopath, but I think it's the long game con people, and cult leaders kind of fit into that cohort.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Gary. I mean, I worked with a psychologist pretty well known for her writings, perhaps the best cult expert of the 20th century. Her name was Margaret Singer, and she was a clinical psychologist, author of the book Cults in Our Midst. And I once called her up and asked her, do you think that David Koresh is a psychopath? And Margaret said to me, Rick, they're all psychopaths.
Yeah.
These cult leaders that are very destructive, they typically fit the profile of a psychopath, and they also exhibit the characteristics of narcissistic personality disorder. which is they totally don't seem to even be in touch with the idea of empathy.
Yeah.
And the only sympathy that they have is for themselves. They portray themselves as victims. And Margaret said, you know, the only difference between a con man and a cult leader is that a con man typically takes the money and splits. They take the
Yeah.
money and run. A cult leader cons the same people for an indefinite period of time. And it can be seen as a con. And in my experience, and I've met many cult leaders over the years, I would say a good many of them, a substantial portion of them, know that they are liars and that they're conning people. And I say that because of their legal maneuvering, the spin that they sometimes play around with, that really is a tip-off that they know that they're running a con. And I think that Keith Raniere knew that he was running a con. David Koresh, I think, is the most dangerous kind, or he was the most dangerous kind of cult leader, which is that they eventually get to a point where they believe their own hype. I think there was a time when David Koresh, I mean, I dealt with him going back to, it was probably about 88, 89, when I first became aware of him. And families would contact me and I would talk to them about how to get someone out. At one point, a mother called me and she had an infant child that was in the compound that they wouldn't let out, even though she had run away to get away from the cult. And I kind of coached her on how to get her papers together and the local sheriff. And she eventually got her child out of the Waco Davidian compound. But there was a point where Koresh would acquiesce. I mean, he let her take her child, essentially, rather than get into it with the authorities. And there was another incident where a young man had a nervous breakdown in the compound, no doubt from the stress imposed by Koresh and his control. And Koresh had somebody basically take him to his family home, which was in Colorado, and summarily dump him off. And to me, that was an act of a con man that knew that he needed to get rid of somebody that could potentially be a legal liability or a problem. But at the end, he chose to die in the compound. Now, there have been all these conspiracy theories about Waco, but let me tell you what the facts are. The facts are that they had infrared aerial photography and they showed multiple and simultaneous ignition points. The forensic evidence showed that there was fuel accelerant that was used to ignite the fire. And they also had planted bugging devices within the compound, and they had audio recordings of the Davidians discussing the fire. So there was no question in the authorities' mind. There have been multiple investigations, lawsuits, criminal prosecutions, that David Koresh, at the end of the day, decided, I am not coming out. And I think that that was for a number of reasons. Number one, he did not want to go to prison. No. He did not want to be like Charlie Manson in prison for decades, doing interviews with various TV personalities who were curious about him and his insanity. I think David Koresh thought, I am king of the compound. I'm going to stay king and I'm going to die on my throne, which was the same thing that Jim Jones ultimately decided after he murdered a United States congressman that came to their compound, which was in Guyana, but all the people in it were from the U.S. And after they killed a congressman, Leo J. Ryan, Jim Jones knew he wasn't going to go free. He was going to go to prison. And so he decided, look, I'm going to pull the plug and everybody's going with me. And there have been a number of situations like that where cult leaders that in my mind, they have basically lost their ability to be rational. They're just over the edge and they decide to pull the plug. They'd rather die and take their followers with them. which you can see as really kind of the ultimate narcissism.
Yeah.
And you could call that a malignant narcissist, because I think their thinking is, and I've talked with them, without me, these people have nothing. I am the center of the known universe. I am the sun. They're the planets revolving around me. Without my light, they have nothing but darkness. So I'm going to be merciful and take them with me, because what else do they have? They have me. And so the cult leader dies, they all die. And this is the dynamic in a destructive cult, Gary, is that everyone is tethered to the leader. Think of it like a train, and the leader is the locomotive, and everyone's hitched to the locomotive going down the track. And when the leader goes off the rails, everyone goes with him. And that's what's happened in so many of these cult tragedies.
Yeah, and you see that in like relationships where there's a psychopath and an empath, and it's like, if I can't have you, no one can. You see that similar behavioral pattern play out. But I suppose when it's a culture talking about, every life's important, but with a culture talking about way more than, say, just one relationship, and that's where it gets, more nefarious. The stakes get heightened even more. But Rick, I want to go back to one point, because we're talking about the NXIVM cult there, and the thing is, a lot of people are, well, from what I've read, there's a lot of educated people, college degrees, educated, middle class, wealthy. How are these people, like, what's the cognitive dissonance? What's the allure? Is it maybe, are people just so lost for meaning, maybe, that they're drawn to it? What's your take?
I am going to blame the predator, not the prey. So I'm going to point out that no one joins a cult knowingly, and that these groups are very deceptive in the way that they recruit someone. The only narrative that I could say is consistent does not coalesce around a particular profile, but rather a time in a person's life when they're having difficulty. And we all go through difficult times in our lives. And the people that get sucked into a cult have the bad luck that somebody, maybe a coworker, an old friend, a relative, an ex, boyfriend, girlfriend, approaches them at a particularly vulnerable time, and they say, look, I've got the answer. Why don't you come with me to my church Bible study? Hey, we're having a volleyball game and a barbecue. You want to come? And you have no idea what you're really getting into. And the person who's recruiting you, you trust them to some level, typically, and you go in and you only learn about the more nefarious beliefs of the group as you become more and more submerged in it, and less connected to your old life, your old friends, your family. You become, in many of these groups, very socially isolated. So you're not getting feedback from people that are outside. You're relying on the people inside who are reinforcing what the leader wants you to believe. So it's almost like sinking into quicksand. I mean, you really don't know that you're being led into that. And so I would say that the responsibility goes to the predator, not to the prey, not to the person who has been exploited and taken advantage of, any more than a woman who is raped. Some people might say, well, you shouldn't have gone on the date with that guy. Well, excuse me, does that give him the right to rape me? I mean, I thought he was a nice guy. I mean, I was introduced to him by an old friend who told me this would be a great guy to go out with. And so I did, and then he raped me. Are you saying that's my fault? So I don't think you want to blame the rape victim any more than you want to blame the cult victim. And in my experience, it could happen to anyone. You're right. I have worked with people that their family was incredibly wealthy, and I've worked with people that were just middle class or even poor people that I have worked with pro bono on numerous cases. So it could happen to anyone. And I'll tell you that I have deprogrammed 5 medical doctors. One was in Ireland. One was, I flew into Dublin, and he was a very respected medical doctor. I won't say where in Ireland, other than it was near Dublin, because I won't want to hurt him or his family. His wife was absolutely overwhelmed by her husband's involvement in this supposedly Bible-based group that was really originally from the U.S., and it was a kind of Pentecostal prayer group that believed in deliverance and warring against Satan and evil forces. And the husband became involved in it, and so involved that he was neglecting his wife and his 4 children and his medical practice. And so I was brought in, and one of his oldest friends that we agreed to also participate was there. I think that they often would go to the pub together and hang out together, and this was somebody he knew all the way back to college. And at one point, he looked at me and he looked at his wife and his friend, and he said, "Oh, screw all of you. You're all crazy." And he stormed up to the upstairs of the house and locked himself in a bedroom. And the wife didn't go up to talk to him. It was his best friend. And it took him hours. But eventually he came down and he said, all right, I'll talk to you because I want to prove that I am not brainwashed and I am not in a cult. I mean, I'm a medical doctor, damn it. And so I sat with him, and eventually he did come out of it. And he left the group, and I believe that saved his marriage. And his wife was crying at different points, saying, "Honey, you're terrifying our children, talking about Satan all the time, and talking about demons, and you've got to cast demons out and protect the kids." And they have nightmares, and they're crying to me about what is Daddy doing? So this was a medical doctor, very respected, who was sucked into this group. And I have worked with other medical doctors, lawyers. One woman I worked with was a clinical psychologist. And I have worked with graduates from Harvard. In fact, one of the doctors that I work with was a graduate of Yale Medical School. And I worked with an MBA from Wharton, graduates from Cornell, Brown, Dartmouth. So all of the major Ivy League universities. And so it could happen to anyone. It really isn't a question of intelligence or education or family background. It's kind of a situation of just plain bad luck, of being caught at a time in your life when you're vulnerable, and someone you trust being part of that formula and then bringing you in. And I think that if we recognize that we ourselves could be a victim, it allows us to think in terms of, well, what would I look for warning signs, and how can I equip myself so that wouldn't happen to me? And another thing that you brought up, Gary, that I just want to agree with, it's very much like an abusive, controlling relationship, where initially the partner who is the abuser is love bombing you and telling you how great you are, but eventually might be beating you up or taking you to the cleaners financially or whatever. And that same process of gaslighting and manipulation is going on in a cult. And the person, of course, in a one-on-one relationship is in love, or they believe they're in love. Usually when they realize that they're involved with a sociopathic narcissist, they say, gee, that wasn't what I signed up for. And you certainly deceived me, because you certainly did not portray yourself as being that kind of a person. You always were blaming me. And one of the things that the abusive controlling partner has in common with the cult leader is the incredible narcissism, and also the fact that they're never wrong, they're always right, and you can't question them, and that they manipulate you, but they will never admit that they are knowingly manipulating you. So that can be very frustrating. But it's very similar. There is a parallel between it being in an abusive controlling relationship and being in a destructive cult.
Yeah. And I'd say even on that, Rick, to nearly add to that, like I think where the cult gets even more insidious is the exploitation can be tethered back to some sort of spirituality. Like I had a cult survivor, Ben Shenton, on the podcast. So Ben was kind of grew up in the family, the Australian cult, the family. It was run by a female, which is kind of a bit rarer as well. And I think Anne Roberts,
Anne Hamilton Burney.
But that was it, Anne Hamilton Burney, yeah. But I think with him, like, they endured, like, it was just kind of like...
She was a really bad cult leader. I mean, she believed that she was Jesus reincarnated.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't realize that the cult leader brainwashes the people to believe, I am Jesus, I am Buddha, I am the channel that God has chosen to speak to the world. Yeah. And so people think that if they disagree with the leader, they're not disagreeing with somebody in, a regular human being.
Yeah.
They're disagreeing with God. And if they leave the group, they're leaving God. They're turning their back on Jesus. But, Anne Hamilton Burney was anything but like Jesus. I mean, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, didn't care about money or materialism. Anne Hamilton Burney lived the high life based on what she extracted from her followers. I mean, she lived a very privileged, luxurious lifestyle. And many cult leaders do. I mean, they have access to millions and millions of dollars. When Keith Raniere was arrested, I think he had 8 or 9 million in his checking account. I mean, and this is the kind of way that these people are. It's very opportunistic, and they take advantage of people. And you could say that it's kind of like a business scheme in which everybody suffers to some extent, but the leader. And the leader is all powerful and gets all the money at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, it sounds so like Bernie Madoff. If Bernie Madoff had followers, it's like, as if I closed my eyes there and you're describing that, it's like that Madoff's pyramid scheme. Like he eventually came to justice. Like I think a lot have, but like I read there's, like, I don't know, you'll correct me on this, I just read this online, that there's 3,000 active cults in the United States. Like, could that be true?
Much more. There were 3,000. Now it's estimated that there are more than 10,000 that have been reported, that complaints have been received by the International Cultic Studies Association, which is a network of academics, and they have they have received complaints from families, from individuals about groups. And apparently they have logged about 10,000. And at one point it's been said also that about 3% of the population of the United States has either been involved in a cult at one point or is currently involved. So people just know somebody who knows somebody. I mean, you talk about the 3 degrees of separation or whatever, and how many of us know a woman that was brutally exploited by an abusive controlling partner? 1 out of 3 women in the United States, I think, say that they were in an abusive controlling relationship at one point in their life. So I think that's a good analogy, is to understand that when a person first becomes involved in a destructive cult, it's kind of like falling in love with an abusive controlling partner. You're love bombed, you're wined, you're dined, so to speak, and you're lured into a kind of bait and switch con, where what you think you're getting, which is the bait, this perfect love, this wonderful group that is godly and according to the principles of the Bible and so on. But in reality, that's just the lure, that's the bait. And once you get inside, it's a whole different ball game. You're being exploited. There are incredible demands being made of you. And you become so submerged in the group environment and socially isolated to a large extent that you really don't imagine any alternative to this world that you've been encapsulated within. And so I think people can't imagine how people inside a destructive cult can do those crazy things that they're doing. But in reality, they look at us on the outside and say, they're crazy. We're the ones that are sane. And that's a conditioning that is going on inside that bubble in a kind of alternate universe, an alternate reality in which they are being told that the things that they're doing are perfectly reasonable, are sane, and so forth. And they're not getting accurate feedback. They're being reinforced over and over again by other members around them who they are told are the right people to associate with, to discuss things with. And their old friends and family are being sidelined to varying degrees depending on the cult, and particularly if they raise questions. And so the people on the inside adapt to this new world, and they see what we think of as crazy as being normal or normalized. And it's an upside down world. And it can be very, very destructive because these cult leaders have no meaningful accountability. I mean, who are they accountable to? They're typically dictators who the only way you can vote is with your feet. You can leave. And people feel that if they leave, they have turned their back on God. They have betrayed the higher purpose. They're leaving behind maybe family and friends, depending on how long they've been in the group. Many people are born into these groups. So if you leave, there are these incredible exit costs that you contemplate. Am I going to lose my family? Am I going to lose my job? Are people that are my longtime friends going to cut me off? Am I going to lose my salvation? Am I going to lose my purpose in life that I've been indoctrinated to believe is the total focus of my life? So it becomes an unseen kind of imprisonment by chains that are psychological, that are emotional, that keep people from leaving and staying for many times, many, many years before they may or may not wake up and decide to leave.
Yeah, and just as you're describing that, in the detail there, I'm thinking what's the legal recourse here? What is? See, this is the thing. If it's a murky area, because if someone is there on their own volition, and if the authorities can't get in for a crime, how does the legal framework operate against cults then? Because this is very complex by the sounds of it.
Well, there's a cult that just got raided the other day in Michigan. The mansion of the leader was raided by the attorney general, and the police conducted a raid. It's a group called it's a group called, let me think, Flame Universe or something like this, where people are told that the group knows your true spiritual soulmate, and they will find that soulmate for you. And people sign up and they give their lives to this group, and they believe that the group will find them the perfect partner. And some of them, many of them women, have been told by the group that their soulmate is another woman in the group, and that they need to become a man in order to have that relationship. And some women who have left under those circumstances have said, well, I'm not a lesbian. I don't want to change my gender. And yet the group was pressuring them to do just that. And so what I suspect the raid is about is probably labor exploitation, possibly sex trafficking. So what happens in these groups is that the group has done something that has crossed the line criminally. Like, for example, with Keith Raniere, there was charge card fraud. There was financial fraud. Also, he was moving people from one country to another and then exploiting them sexually. That's sex trafficking. A group may be involved in illegal labor practices. For example, child labor against the law. Or they may, commit any number of crimes in the course of what they're doing to their members and how they're extracting money from them. So when they cross that line criminally, they can be held accountable. It's not about their beliefs, it's about their behavior. Are they behaving badly, and are they behaving criminally? Yeah. And so I've been involved in a number of court cases, as you may know, as a court expert witness. I've testified across the United States, and I've also submitted expert testimony outside the United States. So in cases that I've been involved in that are criminal cases, it's for example, there's a man who led a group called Carbon Nation, and his name is Eligio Bishop. And I think it was last year I was on the witness stand testifying against Mr. Bishop and analyzing his group. He was being prosecuted for rape, unlawful imprisonment of women in the group, and ultimately he was found guilty and sentenced to over 100 years. He's now in prison. So where Bishop crossed the line was not letting women leave, forcing them to stay, and then assaulting them physically and raping them. And that is when a leader crosses the line. So it's not about their crazy beliefs that we may look at and say, well, that's crazy. The leader thinks he's God. The leader thinks he's Jesus, Buddha, or from outer space, and he's an alien being that beamed down to planet Earth, which is what Marshall Applewhite taught his followers in the group called Heaven's Gate. Yeah. And so it's not about the crazy beliefs. It's about their behavior, their actions. Did they cross the line and break a law? And if so, they can't rationalize it by saying, well, I'm Jesus. I can do whatever I want. Or God told me I could do this. No, you cannot do anything you wish in the name of your beliefs. But you can believe whatever you want. But there's a limit to where those beliefs end and criminality begins.
Yeah. So like that's one of your more famous quotes, all right? It's not about, they're not defined by their beliefs, but their behaviors. Rick, I want to ask, because like there's almost, like whenever you go through so many of the cult cases, sexual exploitation becomes, like, it's just so apparent. It's like the thread that weaves through so many, and not them all, of course. But like, I do try and figure out why. Like, does sex become a resource that they just want to take? Is it some sort of almost primitive thing that's maybe... Like, I can't understand why it's always such a big component, whether it's Koresh, it's Manson, even in some of the smaller cults, the cult leader could be, fornicating with people's wives that are other members. Why does it so often go back to that sexual component, that sexual exploitation?
Gary, I think it's all about control and power. It's not the sexual act. It's the perception, I have control over you. My control is so total. I control your body. I control you sexually. I dominate you in that way. I mean, Keith Raniere was an example of that, and so was David Koresh. Keith Raniere raped children as well. He reportedly raped a 12-year-old girl in upstate New York, and there was another girl that he exploited when she was 15. So it's about power. It's about control. It's about dominating. This is the issue. Charlie Manson was like that. He would have sex with men and women in the group, and I don't think it was really about sex. It was about, I own you, I control you, I dominate you. And that was what it was about. Cult leaders are all about power and control. And they will frequently humiliate members and degrade them in front of other members just to show everyone that they are all powerful and they control the narrative. And in small groups like the Waco Davidians, that can be just overwhelming. David Koresh would not allow, at the end, anyone to have sex in the compound other than him and whoever he chose to have sex with at any given time. So the men, even men that were married, were being housed away from their wives. They were not sleeping with their wives. And if David Koresh wanted to, he would sleep with their wife. And in fact, in some situations, their wives would have children with David Koresh, even though it was adultery. And in this upside down world that he created outside of Waco, Texas, he said this was holy. This was part of his mission given to him by God. He called himself David Koresh, and he would say, I am of the house of David, and you are blessed to receive the seed of David. And at one time, girls and women would wear a Star of David to denote that they were possessed by him. He was their husband, the only person that they could have sexual relations with. And so that was the way the Waco Davidian compound went. And I think it was all about his power. I am your father, I am your husband, I am your sexual partner, I am your leader, I am your savior, I am everything to you. And I don't want anyone to have a relationship or a sense of loyalty to anyone but me. And this is a very extreme example of how a cult leader may operate. And I think, you have to realize that cults, like everything, are on a continuum. So there are some cults that are much more destructive than others. Mm-hmm. And cults evolve and change. Some of them may become less destructive. Some of them may become more destructive, depending on either the whim of the leader or a change in leadership. A cult leader dies, a new person takes over. They're not as bad as the former leader, or in some situations they're worse than the former leader. So the group is then changed, and it can become worse. It can become more relaxed, less controlling, depending on who is in the leadership position. But what we're looking for, Gary, in any destructive cult are three core characteristics that we can find. And this is what I call the nucleus for the definition of a destructive cult. It's based on a paper that was published at Harvard by psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, who wrote the book Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, which is an excellent book to read if you want to understand what brainwashing, what we call brainwashing, really is. Yeah. So anyway, Lifton said three core characteristics. One is the all-powerful leader who becomes an object of worship. Whatever the group says they're all about, that kind of drifts away. And what becomes the main glue of the group, the organizational glue that binds it together, is the defining leader who is an object of worship and who represents God, represents the higher power, whatever. Second, that leader uses thought reform, coercive persuasion, to gain undue influence over the people in the group. And the way you can see that is the people are consistently doing whatever is in the best interest of the leader, but frequently against their own best interests. So that defines, for me, undue influence.
Yeah.
And then finally, the leader has this power of control over the people in the group, and he uses it to do harm to the followers, to exploit them, to take advantage of them. And that varies by degree from group to group. So you have the all-powerful leader, the object of worship, the use of thought reform to gain undue influence, and the use of undue influence to do harm to the people in the group and others frequently. So you put those three together and you have a destructive cult. And it doesn't matter what the group believes. It might believe in the Bible, or they would say they believe in the Bible, or they might be political or philosophical, or it could be about martial arts or a diet program, or even just a multi-level marketing scheme. But if you have those three core characteristics, it can be seen as a destructive cult.
Yeah, so I lighten the mood for a bit, Rick. When I lived in Toronto for a number of years, and I was only 23 or that, but I went I was working in fitness at the time, personal training. So I answered an advertisement in Craigslist, and it was the job interview, which was pitched as a job interview, was out in a hotel in Mississauga. So I thought nothing about it. I was in 3 weeks in Toronto. So I went out anyway, and I get there kind of all in my suit and all dressed up for this interview. But it was like this packed kind of room. I'm like, it was so strange. I was like, what's going on here? And so everyone's sitting down. I'm like, oh, it must be a group interview. But it was for Herbalife. It was like this big kind of it was like a multi-level marketing kind of scheme almost, but it was like I recognized so much of the language being used. Like, it was you could go up and hold the leader's Ferrari, and it was like, oh, you can get this, and it was all this sort of language. We're going to make you this, and you just have to do X. And I remember at lunch breaks just kind of running out of there and getting as quick away as I could, but. Because it's interesting when you said there, it could be a diet program. It could be I tend to think of a cult more as a religious, because even when you were given the three tenets there, I was thinking, these kind of actually mirror up. They dovetail slightly with a criminal gang, but the change resonance in subtleties in different parts, especially on. I think a mob boss isn't really trying to hurt the underlings as much, unless they did something wrong. Then I think it does, but it's not. I think they hurt other people, but I think it's more for profit. Where I think would I be right saying the cult is more for the leader just to gain more power, more control? That's the end goal always.
Well, you've described what could be seen as large group awareness training. That's what I would call it, and I have a chapter in my book, Cults Inside Out, about that, which is a group that has typically an extended weekend of training, and during that period they kind of cut you off from the outside world, and they intensely focus on changing you to believe the philosophy of whoever leads the group, and they use coercive persuasion techniques, which can be seen as really three stages of coercive persuasion, as described by Edgar Schein, a professor at MIT who wrote the book Coercive Persuasion. First comes unfreezing, which is break the person down. And then second, once they're broken, change them, rearrange how they think in a controlled environment. And then three, after you do that, there's the refreezing, or I would call it locking them in. And you do that through social isolation, peer group reinforcement, etc. And so if you're in a LGAT, large group awareness training, they're basically doing that during the training. They have this kind of cathartic confession, going on where people are standing up, giving their testimony, talking about how they were broken in life and all the pain that they've gone through, and everyone becomes kind of broken down, and there's a lot of pressure to expose yourself and share your pain. And then after that, there's this kind of changing process where people are standing up and talking about this so-called way out, or this program, this philosophy that the group offers that is a kind of panacea and will take care of everything in your life no matter what. Your business, your marriage, whatever is your ailment or problem. And then you accept that philosophy as a cure-all, and then the group encourages you to continue taking training and really envelops you in a kind of subculture that is part of what the group is all about, is creating multiple courses that you're taking one after another, and you're socializing with other people in the LGAT. And one of the doctors that I deprogrammed in the US, orthopedic surgeon, was in an LGAT. And that particular LGAT was called Landmark Education, previously known as Erhard Seminars Training, or EST, and they have a weekend initial program called The Forum. And it was created by a man by the name of Werner Erhard, whose given name actually was Jack Rosenberg, but he changed his name to be Werner Erhard. And I've often said to people, have you ever looked at Erhard and asked yourself if this philosophy that he has, which is a mishmash of different things from different sources, Erhard used a bit of, I think, Scientology and a lot of a German philosopher called Heidegger, and that became, his philosophy that is downloaded through the LGAT that he created. And I said, if you look at Erhard, you look at his life, his divorces, his family issues, the issues with his children and so on, his raging against people that disagree with him, does this speak to the success of the training? I mean, because he is the poster boy for the training. This is the creator, the founder, the originator. Why is he such a train wreck? Why is his personal history so strewn with victims and people that say they were hurt by him and failed marriages and so forth? And this was after he had the epiphany to create this LGAT. And what I would also say to people who are enamored with a particular LGAT or they're being approached by one is ask them what scientific measurable results the LGAT actually produces. What they'll typically say is, oh, well, people that do our weekends say they feel great, that it was wonderful. Well, that's subjective. What about scientifically measurable results? You get a control group and you have a group that takes the training and you measure the results 1 year out, 2 years out, 5 years out. Are they earning more money? Do they make higher grades in school? Is their marriage doing well, or is the divorce rate higher amongst graduates than it is with the control group? Were they on medication for anxiety and was the medication decreased or taken away? They didn't need it anymore. So there are ways that you can objectively measure whether or not the training and the philosophy is a success. And I think I don't know of an LGAT that I've ran into that has a scientific study with objectively measurable results that they can show you from their graduates that say is published in a peer-reviewed journal, scientific journal. And some of these LGATs have millions and millions of dollars flowing through them, so they could easily finance such a study. In my opinion, they don't, because they don't want the results to be known, which is that all they're really good at is making people feel that they're doing better subjectively, and not actually producing measurable results.
Yeah, like what was popping through my head there when you were talking as well, like, because like 10,000 active cults, has social media, I think, made it more more successful for, or more conducive for a cult to thrive, or less so? Like my innate or initial kind of thing would have been, oh, social media will like out all this, like, you know, pretenders and stuff. But I'm probably wrong.
No, I thought the same thing. I launched culteducation.com in 1996. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, database with information about cults that is accessible free online to the public. And I thought, just like the situation with Keith Raniere, where these papers were published and it directly impacted his ability to sell NXIVM, because people could go online and find out that it wasn't as portrayed, that it was a negative thing. In fact, that there were people having nervous breakdowns and a suicide associated with the training. So I thought, because of the internet, because of sharing information, that groups would really suffer, in the sense that people could find out about their troubled history before they signed up, before they got involved. They could just Google or initially Yahoo, use Yahoo search or whatever, to find the information online, educate themselves, and then not get involved in the group. And initially, Scientology ferociously fought against anybody that was divulging information about them online. But, you know, that really flipped and turned completely around. And I would have to say that, yes, having information online, free to the public, which many sites have, is very positive, very helpful. There are many people that I receive emails from every day that say, thank you. I Googled this and I found your site and I found this information. But more than that, what I'm seeing is you can start a cult online. All you need to do is you come up with your website, you use social media platforms like Twitter, now X, or, Instagram, TikTok. They even have a group called the TikTok Cult. And Eligio Bishop, that I testified against in Atlanta, Georgia, he had 30,000 followers on Twitter alone. And what he would do is he would stream online. He would use Facebook for group discussion. He, of course, had his web presence. And then he used Airbnb to book locations that would become his essential cult compounds, initially in Mexico, then Costa Rica, then Panama. And when those countries threw him out, he ended up coming back to the U.S., to his hometown of Atlanta, where he was arrested. But what we're seeing now are groups that are completely almost online. So they recruit online. They indoctrinate using YouTube videos to indoctrinate and manipulate people. Then they get their money through Venmo, through PayPal.
Yeah.
And so you can run an entire cult online, and the leader may never even meet you, or you may never be in the physical presence of a leader, and you may be manipulated totally online. And I have been involved in a number of interventions to get people out of online cults that they were recruited into through social media, which is, as you know, a very powerful presence in our lives now. And virtually anybody with a smartphone can be recruited into a cult online and continue to follow that cult and give that cult money by simply using their phone and watching whatever the cult presents and clicking through and giving them money or whatever. And this can be daunting to a family if you have minor children and they're in their bedroom interacting with a cult unbeknownst to you. And I've dealt with situations like that as well.
Wow. So, like, because, like, with the deprogram, like, I'm so fascinated by that, because is it like a reverse NLP? Like, how do you deprogram someone that is, like, you know, maybe that is full on, a fully committed cult member, and that's going to have this, like, severe resistance? I know in a lot of, like, the psychological literature, the clinical application literature, you know, they'll talk about, like a patient having, like, resistance to the therapist. But how does resistance play out then when you're trying to deprogram someone that has this, like, firm, deep-rooted belief?
Well, it's very much like a drug or alcohol intervention in basic structure in that sense. So, for example, someone is an alcoholic, they're a drug addict, their family gets an intervention specialist, they stage an intervention. This is what happened with the former First Lady of the United States, wife of Gerald Ford, Betty Ford. And they got her to stop drinking and drugging, and then she became really an example of someone who could escape that kind of addiction. And then they have the Betty Ford Clinic in the U.S. now for people that want to follow in the footsteps of Betty Ford. But when the family initially approached her, it was as a total surprise. She had no idea they were going to stage an intervention. I don't think she would have been there if she had known in advance. And then the family approached her with the intervention specialist in tow. So they did an intervention as a surprise. Betty Ford did not know. And so a cult intervention is very similar in the sense that you are working with the family, that the family members who elect to be there are there. They're concerned, they're with me throughout the intervention. And the intervention is a discussion of their concerns, coupled with, I'd say, 3 other main blocks of discussion. One being, what is the definition of a destructive cult, and how might that apply to the group that I'm in? Number 2, what information do you not know about the group that has been withheld from you that you should know to make a more informed decision about being in this group? And then 3, what is coercive persuasion? What is thought reform? What are the moving parts of it? And how would you recognize it? And how might it apply to the group that you're currently involved in? So there are 4 blocks: family concern, what is coercive persuasion, thought reform, historical research information about the group, and defining a destructive cult objectively and asking the question, is this similar to your group? This is really an educational process. It isn't counseling, it isn't therapy. And the family is there anchoring the person in place. So if they say, for example, Rick, you suck. I don't want to talk to you. You're a jerk. I don't know you. The family is going to say, well, he is here because we want him here. He's here because we have concerns about what's happening in your life in regards to this group. And we'd appreciate it if you would stay and talk to him. If you won't do it for yourself, and you're certainly not doing it for his sake, will you do it for our sake? Because we love you, we're your family, I'm your spouse, I'm your adult child. Would you do it for me? Will you do it for us? And usually they will say, yes, I will stay, if for no other reason to prove that you are wrong, that I am not in a destructive cult. And so that is the basic structure of an intervention. And at the end of the intervention, which usually lasts, I would say, 3 or 4 days, 8 hours of discussion a day, so really about 24 to 32 hours of discussion. And if the person stays at the end, they, of course, then determine, do I continue with the group? Do I take a break? Do I go back to the group? And unlike a drug or alcohol intervention, where the liquor store owner is not going to come and try to interfere with the process, or the drug dealer, they're not going to contact the person and say, don't listen to your family, keep buying my product. No, but the cult will do exactly that. And of course, with texting, with email, with mobile phones, there is this ability to constantly communicate with the follower, with the member. And so the organization or the group or the leader will do whatever they can, if they're aware, to sabotage the intervention. So that's why it needs to be a surprise, so that that person might agree to take some time out, talk about the family's concerns, with the understanding that they won't be in touch with the group during that period, but with the promise by the family that we will accept your choice at the end of this period of time. We're asking you for 3 or 4 days, and after that, you're going to do what you're going to do, and we accept it.
Yeah. Like, a very broad question here, but like, what, like, for those that do, like, that, you know, it's successful, the intervention is successful for, what is life like after? I know it's very it's broad, it's hard to pin down, like, exactly, because there's going to be so many cases, but is it, yeah.
It can be really heartbreaking. I think that for a person that leaves, it really is about how long were they in and how bad was the group. Some groups are much more destructive than others, so that means there's more pain. They have been hurt more. They have been lied to more. And also, how long did this go on? To the extent that it affected their life, their career, their education, their marriage, their kids. You know, I mean, there are people that they're kids that leave cults as adults that they were born into, and they really have incredible conflict, because they're thinking, well, I love my mom, I love my dad, but because of them, I was in this group and the group hurt me. And now I still love them, but there's a part of me that is angry at them for letting this happen to me. Mm-hmm. Why didn't they protect me? Why didn't they stop the group from hurting me? And in some cases, the pain can be they were raped as a child in the group. They were exploited sexually by the group. They were they submitted to horrible corporal punishment and deprivation in the group. So that can be an issue. So and people are just brokenhearted, because you're thinking, well, gee, I really believed in this. I believed in these people. I thought the leader had the answers. I made sacrifices for this because I believed in the mission. I believed that it was going to make the world a better place. Now I find out that the leader is a con man, and that it's just a fraud. And I spent X amount of time in a fraud, and I have maybe little, if anything, to show for it. I was told that I would be rewarded in heaven. I was told that I would make the world better for everyone, that would be my reward. Well, now that I know that was a lie, mm-hmm. I'm out of the group, and maybe all I have is the clothes on my back. I wasn't in the group for the money. I gave up, in fact, things in order to be in this group. And so I'm brokenhearted. I feel like I was betrayed, but I'm going to get on with my life. And typically, the longer a person was in a group, the longer it will take to recover. Some people I talked to were in a group for 20 years. One man that I mention in a chapter in my book, well, there's a whole chapter about this intervention that I did with a man that was in Scientology for 27 years. And when he left, it was heartbreaking because he knew that he would have to let go eventually of all of his friends that he had made in Scientology. And he had joined when he was 22 years old, and he left at 49. He was almost 50 when he left. Thankfully, his wife also left with him. She was never fully committed. And his kids, even though they took courses and were involved somewhat, never really bought into Scientology. So he had his kids, he had his wife, and he had his family, his sister, his dad. There were people that he still had, but he lost so many people that he really loved that were in Scientology, that he had been friends with them for many, many years, and he had to rebuild his life. So it can be very daunting, and this is why some people will stay longer, because they feel like it's just too much. I can't leave. The exit costs are too high. I don't want to pay that bill. I just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. And like with Scientology, Rick, because they kind of rabidly protected their position and notions of being a cult for years. Like, did they ever come after you? Try sue you? Yeah.
I was sued into bankruptcy by Scientology in the 90s. Their lead counsel, Kendrick Moxon, represented a plaintiff that went after me for a failed deprogramming. And it drove me into bankruptcy. The legal fees, the judgment. Eventually, I came out of it because the young man that Scientology used as a virtual puppet plaintiff decided to leave the cult, which wasn't Scientology, and he sold me a $2 million judgment for $5,000 in cash and a promise to deprogram his wife from the same group that he sued me over, ironically, that he wanted to stay in. And Kendrick Moxon was his lawyer, and so I was harassed by Scientology for years with that litigation. And Scientology has hired private investigators to dig up everything and anything about me. My dossier that they have is almost 200 pages. I've seen it. And so yeah, I have been harassed a great deal. I mean, I've been sued since creating culteducation.com. I've been sued 5 times by different groups to remove information. All of those lawsuits failed to go to trial. They were all dismissed. But the idea behind suing me was to harass me to the point that I would remove that information. And as I said, Keith Raniere sued me for 14 years. He also had me under surveillance. He tried to set me up in a phony intervention with who knows what agenda. He actually paid for my garbage. I lived in a high-rise building at that time in Jersey City, and I was told by a custodian of my building that the garbage chute was broken and to just put my garbage outside the door. And I thought, this is great. I don't have to go and put it down the chute. I found out later in federal court that the garbage was being sold by the custodian to a private investigator hired by Keith Raniere. They also went into my private phone records and my banking records against the law. And so I have been to the rodeo, so to speak, regarding cults harassing me, hounding me, suing me. But thankfully, I'm going to knock on wood. My desk is wood. And I'm going to say, thankfully, there are wonderful lawyers out there. People make jokes about attorneys, but in my experience, lawyers are wonderful because they have represented me asking not even for a penny, just because they wanted to defend my right to criticize destructive cults and my freedom of speech. And I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for those lawyers who have been so generous with their time.
Yeah, like that's amazing. That's the other side of the spectrum. And I suppose I kind of want to just ask this question, like, because I think the generosity there of some of them liars is so, it's so enlightened. But then the darkness of some of these individuals, these cult leaders, like, do you believe in good and evil, or do you think everything is just kind of wired down to, biology and environment clashing into a consciousness, really?
That was a question I once asked Margaret Singer, the
Psychologist.
eminent psychologist, cult expert of the 20th century. And she said to me, Rick, some people are just evil. And there have been papers published and research done about the origins of a psychopath. Are they made or are they born? Keith Raniere was a very, by numerous accounts, evil child. He was harassing people and manipulating people from the age of 10, according to the record that has been reported about his days as a school child. So I think that some people are just inherently that way. I mean, the science is not there completely yet, but it seems like some of the cult leaders may have somewhat different wiring in the brain, where they just don't feel things like other people. I know that Keith Raniere, I never can remember a time that he felt sympathy or empathy for the people that he hurt, and neither did David Koresh. And I could go on and on about cult leaders like Shoko Asahara in Japan, who gassed the Tokyo subway system, and thousands of people were hospitalized and people died, and he had no remorse, none. And this is the pattern of cult leaders. That how can you be a cult leader and hurt people as a way of making your way in the world? I mean, that basically your job description is, I'm a cult leader and I hurt people. I crush them, I manipulate them, I squeeze them, I exploit them. I do whatever I do to get what I want. And that's who I am. That's my job. That's what I wake up in the morning. I have a cup of coffee and it's out there to hurt more people. What kind of a person can do that? And Margaret Singer once told me, Rick, some people are just evil. Yeah. And I think when you look at interviews with Charlie Manson, for example, he is pretty close to evil, or he was pretty close to evil incarnate. I mean, when you look at the way when he kind of loses his cool and he starts yelling and carrying on, and you imagine that individual controlling people's lives, I mean, that is the epitome of the evil cult leader. And I think that's what makes Charlie Manson iconic, even though his cult, the Manson family, was really a relatively small group. But they were, they murdered people, and they killed them with no intent other than to fulfill Manson's wishes and to create this helter-skelter race war that he was anticipating and predicting. There's another cult right now in the United States that's unfolding. They're called the Zizians, and they're led by this trans woman named Jack Ziz Lasoda, and he's now in jail. A number of the people are in jail, and it's just like dead bodies.
And what was the cult? Like, what did they believe in, or like?
Well, they believed in supposedly a kind of philosophy based on rationalism, but in reality, it was whatever I think Jack Ziz Lasoda said, which is how they became known as the Zizians, because he was their object of worship, their focus, their defining element, and driving force. And he led them into a rather isolated existence. And they were all very educated. Many of them had degrees in computer science. They were highly accomplished. Some of them came from very good families in Seattle, in Pennsylvania. Some attended university in England. I think one did. And so, this was a group of people that were really intelligent. And Lasota was also accomplished, and I think he had a bachelor's degree in computer science, and he led them and he molded them, and in the end they were killing people. They killed a landlord. They killed one person's parents died. Then a border security guard was killed in Vermont. And it just goes on. And then there are also suicides linked to the group, where they believed that people who could not endure the pressure and the demands of the group just decided to kill themselves. And so there were suicides linked to this group as well. And by my estimation, from what I've seen, Lasota is very similar to Charlie Manson, a very small group that ends up killing people.
Yeah.
And he also has these kind of haunting features and very Manson-esque. So Charlie Manson became kind of the icon of the cult leader, and there have been a number of people that have followed after him that were far more powerful, far more destructive, and very similar in personality.
Yeah. Like, I never heard anything about that cult. Like, yeah, not under, like, a murderous cult is kind of like rare. Well, thankfully it's a bit more rare anyhow, but wow, I'm going to have to do a bit of research into that cult. Like you said, it was recent enough, was it?
Oh, it's in the news right now, and people are going in and out of court. People are being arraigned. They're they're not getting bail release.
Yeah.
And they're in the process of prosecuting the members of this group called the Zizians.
Zizians, wow. Okay, I'm going to have to look them up. God, we're nearly at an hour and a half. Rick, I feel like I'll probably chat to you for another 8 hours, so you might come back on again on a future date, because by the sounds of it, if there's still 10,000 active, you've probably still a lot of work to do. Like, it's by the way, it's amazing work you do. I think, the book is incredible, but I think, the lasting legacy I think you'll definitely leave will be, all them people you helped, and for them to be able to go on and actually live fulfilling lives after being probably in what I can only imagine as some sort of horror movie, maybe trapped in some of these scenarios and the exploitation. So yeah, you're doing God's work, Rick, and all commendations to you. I know you mentioned your site, but where can people learn more? Where can they connect with you, learn more? Just call out them, and I'll put the links in.
The Cult Education Institute has a Facebook page where you can follow what I'm doing. Also, I have a Twitter, now X, account under Rick Allen Ross, where people can follow me and they can see breaking stories like the Zizians and so on. And they can also go to culteducation.com or cultnews.net, which are, the culteducation.com is the gateway to the database, which is free to the public. No cookies, no ads, just information. And it's broken down into groups. There's a subsection that recently came up regarding the Zizians, and there are many others. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of groups within that database that you can find information on. There's also a message board attached to culteducation.com where people can dialogue with other former cult members, where they can talk about groups that they're suspicious about or they're concerned about. And that message board has something like 125,000 entries to date, and threads about all kinds of different groups, groups that people have not heard of, that they can find information on through that message board, searching the database.
Okay, I will link all them in the description. So I suppose any of the audio listeners just go into the descriptions, and same on the YouTube channel. But yeah, I highly recommend your book as well to all the listeners out there. Cults Inside Out. Yeah, it is the seminal book in my eyes, all about cults. So check that out. I'll actually put a link in the description as well if anyone wants to go really deep into it. So Rick, absolute pleasure having you on. Really appreciate all the knowledge there you shared. Yeah, thanks a million.
Well, thanks, Gary. I appreciate it. And it's been great talking to you. And I hope people get something out of it and use it for the future.
And on that, Rick, thanks a million. Cheers.
Okay.